event or something.
Thank you, Timo. Google Meet
Timo.
is not worthy. They're free service.
Hey there, Steve. Welcome.
Okay.
All right, started recording into the cloud. I'll upload this later.
Thanks, Pete.
Part 2.
What were you talking about, Tino? Was that
Just looking back at our coding history.
okay?
What I was like saying was like, I learned functional programming first in college, and then I got into object-oriented, and I've never gone back. And so he talked about getting introduced to object-oriented first and then learning functional. And then now he was like, oh, functional, that's interesting. So I was I was also sharing that sort of my philosophy is we need to run both of these, I think, in parallel and see which one comes out better.
It'd be interesting to see the contrast between the two. I mean, I come from this background, Emacs, for many years. Emacs, I know. Yeah.
That's what I use all the time.
So I love Emacs because you can rewrite, it rewrites itself. Everything can rewrite itself. Everything can be a function. So, yeah. And that kind of turns me on to functional programming. But I don't know much. I haven't used object-oriented stuff since the 90s, so I'm not really that competent. But, so I'm out. So I'd love to see a counter argument to that. Like, how would a direct acyclic graph be represented in an object-oriented paradigm? I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah.
Because it seems to me to naturally lend itself to functional programming. But maybe that's. But the problem with functional programming is and I was just saying this to Vincent. Maybe it's not very accessible to people. So.
I know. The original. Let me just say this real quick, Vincent, and head back up over to you. Like that original idea that you put up there, where you had like that thing, and then all the 4 branches coming off of it. That initial thing you created, like that's the thing that grabbed me. Is like that's a collection. Like you just graphed a collection. You had a collection with 4 members in that collection, and then it created, and you can create that graph, and then each one of those things could itself be a collection that would then have branches off of there to the different items that connected to it. So as properties off of that object.
Because I saw it as a series of functions that transforms itself as it traverses a network. So you see, so as you go down to an edge, it transforms itself into another state, like number calculus. So it becomes something different, encapsulates itself, and carries its state as it goes along.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I would say that you're right. You can definitely represent it that way. The graph itself is a visual representation of functional pathways, which are unactivated functions, right? So it is a representation of every possible function that, with every possible set of arguments that can be, well, I shouldn't say every possible set, but every named argument that you would pass in, right? That could be executed.
here's my argument for why functional programming would be advantageous. It's because as you traverse the network, right, you're following a direction, you're making a choice. Okay, so you're changing your state. Okay, and a functional paradigm can accommodate that because it will transform itself into something else. Okay, whereas an object-oriented approach will have to refer to something to change itself. See, so it's less efficient. That's why I've jumped into that.
It wouldn't have to refer to something else to change itself. There are the fundamentals of the object itself, and then there's the fundamentals of the collection. So if you belong to a connection, you have a connection into that collection. There are functions that the collection would execute, and there's the functions that the object would execute. And there's actually bad programming in object-oriented if it gets confused. So if somebody executes a function on a collection to change something on the object, that's actually bad object-oriented programming, and that wasn't coded correctly. But I don't think there's anything for the concepts that we're talking about. I don't think there's any conflicts when it's built right, when it's when it's run correctly.
Yeah.
It's funny that you say, Vince, like, or just a tag on this one part here, because it's so funny when you're talking about like how you saw it as these points and these connections in a function. Like I learned graphing first as objects. And so I see an object map. And so I see like, here's an object that connects out to that object. And then that object connects out to this object. And it has a bunch of properties. And one of those properties is the link back to the thing that was pointing to it in the first place. And so it's funny that you look at it and you see functions, and I look at it and I see a mapping of objects.
That's what I was about to say, that I imagine graphs like maps of reality, and then you apply functions to extract useful to represent scenarios that from that map, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
I have no idea of graphs. I have no education on graphs, but that's the way I'm thinking about it. Okay, you map things and then you execute functions that allows you to perform whatever.
Yeah, if I can say this real quick, I just had a revelation, which is that if the graph isn't a mapping of objects, then in the world that I was talking about, property invocation programming, basically it's a set of functions that if you traverse a bar between two nodes, you know these functions are going to run. And anytime you traverse that bar from one direction or another, you have a listing, you have a registered list of functions that are going to run, and it gives you that nice audit trail.
That's linked. I don't know. I heard
Is
that.
there something, I mean, when I come to function approach, it's writing those functions as you do it. It's not that there's a function you refer to, it's a function that you write as it. So if you transverse a node, the very act of transversing the node causes you to rewrite the function you're in. That's the difference between a functional approach and an object-oriented approach. And so object-oriented approach presumes that you have the function already. But how do you know? How does that work in unexpected or novel environments?
Thibaut, you had your hand up.
Oh yeah, I would like to take us from this abstract discussion to more action-based.
Absolutely.
And I linked the Miro board link. I hope you can join. The same thing I wrote in the Discord chat. So we talked about like different concepts we can do, and then we talked about like this kind of programming stuff. And I have with red notes. I have two questions because we need to make a decision. What are we going to build right now? So if we can, as a group, select our system we want to create right now, but it has to answer one question, and I guess Vincent can answer that. Can we create graph for all of these? Like, can we create the graph for reputation system? Can we create graph for funding system? And can we create graph for election system? We did see election system graph right now, so I assume that is possible. But how would, because I don't know, how hard or is it possible to do for funding or reputation? Because that can go like very webby.
You know, I think that kind of just depends on how involved you want to get, right? So someone brought up like bonding curves and stuff like that. So I think a lot of it becomes, it just depends on how complicated we want to get with the system, right? And how we want to define interfaces and stuff like that. I think everything can be done. Yeah, everything can be done. It just depends on how much time we have to spell it out. Because if somebody was going to build this from scratch, right, how would they build it? They'd just start with a blank set of code, and they start coding out a bunch of stuff and have these interactions. What I'm just saying is that we need to have these concrete interactions first, and then use these concrete atomic interactions to then describe the network. So we just have to. It's more like we have to be able to map every. I guess, okay, so here I will throw this back to both the functional and the object. I'm a data guy. I actually want a data-driven approach with functions maps to data in the end. Because to me, that's more important because I'm more interested in where the data lives and how it's being transformed and the process by which it's being transformed. Because I think, in my mind, the biggest problems with moving to a decentralized space, and especially with data living in all these different spaces, is where is the data? How is it transformed? How is it maintained? Who owns it? That kind of thing. So I think there's a lot there. But yeah, I think we can go either way. I'd say we just pick one. Just pick one and then start sketching out all of the transformations, all of the actual data points that we need to modify and maintain. And then we can decide whether or not the primitives are functional or not. Then we can decide what the signatures of the functions are going to look like, or what the objects themselves are going to look like, and what the list of functions are going to be. And you can, but I think you still end up in the point where we need to define the graph abstractly is a representation of transformations. So it very much lends itself to the functional approach, right? It is a representation of authorized transformations, where an actor authorizes a transformation of state. That's what the graph is. It's all it is. So it's a bunch of transformations. How you activate it is another layer, right? So that's all these bonding curves and voting and stuff like that. So I think if we can just pick a system and keep it as simple as possible and say, what transformations do we need to do? Who's going to authenticate those transformations? And how do we get user input? How do we oracle data into the system? What does that interface look like? So we have this interface, and we have this set of transformations that happen once the data, the oracles get their data in. I don't know, maybe it'll kind of illuminate where we want to go from there.
Okay. While you're thinking, I created emojis for the stickies, so choose what you think we should talk about, and then we can just see what most people want to talk about. And Pete?
I totally put my hand up, and then I forgot what I put my hand up for.
Okay, let's do reputation. And Enfold, why are you creating the text on a notepad? Or Martha? You can totally double click on the notes, and then it will automatically adjust its size.
Thank you. Bad iPad user in Miro, which is my nemesis.
I don't like Apple products, but I guess that's why it doesn't work for you that well.
That's because you're a functional programmer.
You're just not holding it right.
Why don't we take it back to primitives and look? It looks like reputation system's winning.
Yep.
Why don't we just take it back to primitives and say, okay, let's look at, and I'll say let's look at it from because the graph. If we're gonna design it from the graph and look at these primitives, it makes more sense to take a data-driven approach and ask, what are the data points that what are the states that we have to track, and what are the functions that need to modify those states, and then who's going to authenticate those functions, and then the actual implementation can be whatever seems easiest. But I'm curious as to what those primitives are. What are the functions? What are the arguments such that this would work? Does that make sense? I mean, because I don't know what states we have to track, and what kind of, how do we represent those states as primitives, and the function signatures, like what arguments do we need to have for this to work?
So my suggestion is to just like, I don't know, we could, I was like, I don't know, is it a bad example, but let's say we want to give a reputation based on who is doing the most work at this Miro board right now. So it kind of assumes that I'm doing it, but how do we now make that reputation look like I am doing it, and who is the next one? So in order to give that, now there's a question, do we want a base reputation for everybody, or we just choose to give a reputation. And then, like Pete says, it's a collection of reputation. So because it just addresses the one thing. If we take this example, then we now have like a resource, I guess, is, I don't know what the function, I don't know, is it a resource or a function or an actor that the Miro board actions, like it's a like result, and the reputation is a source for that specific result. So now we have two things.
Well, yeah, I think it's why don't we start there? Why don't we start with reputation as a data state, as a state. Every person will have a reputation, right? And we can just say that abstractly. Everybody is going to have a reputation. What state is that? What data is it? Is it going to be a collection of? Is it going to be like just a hash table with a bunch of text in there, or is it going to be a number? Is it? Why don't we just start there? Start with the state that we actually have to modify for reputation, and then, or yeah, why don't we just start there and just see what? Okay, like what is the data we have to track for reputation in this system, in this pseudo system?
All right. And maybe I am missing sort of a context here, but my brain is going to sort of the start with why kind of thing. In order for me to participate and understand, I have to know, why are we collecting reputation?
People have talked about reputation so we can determine trustworthiness, I believe. I mean, that's been one of the common conversations that it always seems to lead to trustworthiness. How does somebody determine, how is someone, a new person or an established member, determine trustworthiness?
It can also be used for, like Thibaut was saying, it could be a proxy for effort, or a proxy for involvement. So not just who to trust, but also who did the work. So if there was an allocation, you could design allocation systems based on reputation as well, voting or financial. So it's some kind of a metric that it's some measure or some set of data points with which measures can be drawn to then further do trusted decision making or governance or financial allocations, right? So it's just a set of data points that people can build strategies from, whatever those are, either whether to let somebody on a team share data with them, give them voting power, or give them money.
Also, I suppose it depends on what is the meaning of your trust. You know, so if the meaning of your trust is we trust this person because they did a lot of contributions, then that's why we trust them. Or, on the other hand, it may be we trust this person because a lot of people voted for them. You know, so it could be either of those, and one could be more meaningful or not than the other.
And that's why it seems important to be able to sort of zoom in and zoom out and see who the circles are of those particular people, so we can sort of track or observe or see the patterns of their influence. So if everybody's as a person could have their system attached to them, so we could, I mean, that seemed important. So anybody could see it. So it was transparent. Each person's trust and who they trusted was carried with them and was transparent and observable by others.
I suppose one of the immediate thoughts is, how does that fit in with sovereign identity issues? Like,
you know what, I think this is why I want to, oh, go ahead, Stephen, I'm sorry.
Or sovereign identity issues of anonymity. Like you could, can you track a contribution model and still respect someone's sovereign identity?
Yeah. To me, it's feeling analogous, and correct me if I've got the wrong picture here, of kind of like a like concept. You know, this person did something that I liked, I give them a thumbs up. Other people did something that they like, they give them a thumbs up. You know, and the more things that they do that they like, I'm giving them more thumbs up. And that, to my brain, goes towards the Black Mirror problem, that in the larger scale, the like is not a good measure of actual trust or value. And if it were about measuring value of contribution to a project, I've got other models that I think are more accurate in the representation of that. So,
Agreed.
I think I would not say that now is a good time to decide on the best reputation system. And it kind of goes against what I'm trying to accomplish in this meeting. I want to accomplish the primitives that could build any reputation system, not what the perfect reputation system is for Catalyst. That's not what that is something that I'm very interested in building in the future. But for right now, for today, for what I need to do this weekend in terms of what I'm going to be chugging monsters all night coding, I need to know, okay, what is a demo system for reputation? It doesn't have to be perfect, so that we can extract the primitives and build the graph and then look at it and then say, okay, as people interact with this reputation system, how does it behave? Can we simulate behavior in the reputation system to see what it does? That's what I'm interested in. So I think maybe if we could just say, okay, let's pick two data points with which a pseudo reputation could be extracted. Let's just pick them. And then we'll say, we're going to store that state. End of story. Like we're just going to store that state. Let's start figuring out how we're going to modify that state in a DAO. So we can start making these connections. So I don't want us to get too in the weeds with the ideal reputation system. I want to see what the primitives look like so that we can start Legoing up any kind of system we want, if that's okay. I don't want to detract from what you guys are saying. I think it's totally valid. But we won't be able to get a demo system up if we don't decide on a few data points. So I don't know if we can come up with a couple.
I think it was actually a good point, but how do we create like, I have seen the episode, so to me the one thing what was problematic there was that you could dislike. So what if we make a system where you cannot dislike, so you cannot make person negative, so it only has positive in his circle, and how could we somehow create it? It's like I don't know, is it a good thing or bad thing, like a tribal, in a sense that if you look at the person from your perspective, while you are outsider, you see everybody in that circle equal, even though there are like different ratings for them. But once you get into that local circle and you gain the reputation from them, you now are seeing starting to see a little different structure, because they like different things. So you're like outsider would see that they're all working together, but once you get inside, you are starting to see more structure in there. So okay, I wonder if this is something what fixes the rating system.
Not perfect, but why don't I just propose this as a data point? We have likes in this reputation system. It's something we have to track. This is we have a set of key value pairs where we have a UUID that could represent anything, represent an article, represent a conversation, a conference, whatever, just a UUID, and then a sum of likes, no dislikes. And that's just one of the data points that we'll collect for this early represent. This is just one data point. How does that sound as one data point?
Could I offer a tweak on this that I think will go towards this direction here, which is that there is no dislike, but I could take a like away if I change my mind.
Okay, hold on.
I brought up the point because I've seen people slip into schizophrenia, right? You know, and it's like it's very subtle for a long time, and then they go off the rails, right? So like in that process, they get less and less dependable. So in a community situation, right, you know, it's like you don't want to trash this person, but hey, we can't call him to do these things anymore. You know, he can't deal with it.
Yeah, I can't advocate for him anymore.
I think I got you. How about this? The data structure will be a document ID, a public key, and a binary. Actually, that's it. That's all you need. That's all you need. You need a set of document IDs and public keys, and you can remove your own key. In this system, you can remove your key. Then the amount of likes is a function that just pulls out the sum of all unique keys for any and all unique documents. Like you can create the sum of likes from that data structure. How does that sound as a data structure?
So it's good, but
To just move on. We don't want to get too crazy.
I think it's dangerous though. I think it's dangerous. But go ahead.
So I was just going to say, could we create the primitives, or what we would call them, between granting a reputation and earning reputation? So who grants a reputation? A node has to grant reputation. Yeah. And how do you earn reputation? That has to be done via an edge. It doesn't. An earning mechanism is a smart contract, essentially. So that's an edge. And someone who grants a reputation is a person, an entity, or whatever paradigm we're using. So aren't those two things primitives?
I think so. Yeah, that's what I want to get to is okay. So let's put that down. So we have, let's just call
I've
this.
put them on the mirror board. So I put them on the mirror board.
So we'll call this a grantor, and then they.
So I suppose granting reputation is similar to the like system, you know. So it's like, but I suppose it could be more sophisticated than that potentially. It could be transactional. So let's say, like in source code, for example, you may like something, but there may be some rules applied to it. So maybe a combination of a node and an edge. So if I like Steve's post, I will only get some reputation if I use a certain emoji, for example. But you could attach some meaning to that. Do you know what I mean? So, like, you could attach the meaning like, I've liked all Steve's posts. That makes me less reliable because I'm always going to like Steve's posts. Yeah, that kind of rule.
But sometimes I'm always right.
I've found that to be the case, but nevertheless, it still negates my contribution.
It's that Southern drawl. It's the Southern drawl. It creates a kind of confidence.
An illusion. Well, here's a thought that I want to put into this, and trying to figure out all the ways that this might be good or bad. Like in this kind of system, once somebody voluntarily goes into a DID kind of way to identify themselves and to build their reputation, like I can imagine that some of these young dudes or young people in this community right now, they work, they build this reputation, but boom, all of a sudden they've got a serious relationship and they can't do this anymore. And in that regard, then the intelligent thing to do would be to pull their DID out of this system until they're ready to take part and continue to build on their reputation. Like what I'm saying is there should be a consciousness on somebody, a sovereign individual in particular, for when it's appropriate to have your DID out there for reputation building or losing. You know what I'm saying?
I think so. And it ties into another question that I had as well, which is that, is my reputation something that follows me around? So if I earn reputation with you all in the DAO library, and then I go over to like Catalyst School, does that reputation come with me to the Catalyst School, or do I start over from zero inside of the Catalyst School area?
Well, see, this is something that I talked about with a developer a couple 3 months ago, where we were talking about What we needed was a personal did generator. You know, like I'm going to create an ID for this community or this situation. And when I'm there, this is the one that I use. And when I'm someplace else, I use a different ID because I'm tracking for myself or building for myself a different reputation. And I don't want to bleed these things over, whether that's for a desire for anonymity or just, you know, appropriate use case for appropriate situation. You know, like I may not want y'all to know that I'm a topless dancer on the weekend. So, you know.
It's pretty obvious, Steve, really.
I try to be subtle, but, you know.
I know, just
Earth tones.
Yes, you can't miss it.
The neon comes out on Saturday nights.
It does.
I think this can be accomplished though with the data structure. So if we maintain in this data structure, in this arbitrary data store, and SSID, so that would be the individual's ID, however that gets assigned, doesn't matter. And a array of key value pairs that are document IDs and keys, where if there is a document ID and a key in there, it's an assumption of a person liking that document, whatever that document is. Okay, so it doesn't, we're not gonna get into what those documents are. We're not gonna get into anything like that. It's just a data structure that is an SSID and an array of document ID / public keys. And then that way, if somebody wants to remove their like, they can remove by public key. And we'll assume that there's some mechanism within the function. You are the actor, so the actor needs their private key to add a public key document ID pair to this data structure. So this is a good point. Does the actor do it, or is there an intermediary that controls this data structure? Or should the actor be able to sign a transaction that sends metadata, that sends their public key and like and add, or their public, I guess that's a good question. So what is the actor actually going to send in this case? What is that function? That function needs to be either, this is a really good question.
Well, Vincent, I think of another primitive that we might be missing here, where let's say the node, or I'm keeping it the node as the person, is liking something. Okay, and that's the edge, if you like. The act of liking something is the edge.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's why, and why are they liking it? And that is the contribution, the activity, the meaning of it. You know, or the intangible. So, for example, I'm liking what TiVo's post because it contributes this. You know, so that's another. I think I think that might be represented by a node, perhaps. Is that represented by a node or another edge? Because it's a contribution in essence, isn't it? So is a contribution a necessary primitive in the system, in the reputational system? I mean,
I would argue that you can, if you have a UUID for all likes, right? So you have a public key. The uniqueness requirement for this set of likes is a public key and a UUID. Okay, so they must both be distinct, so you can't double like, right? Okay, so with that requirement, any contextual information that you want to apply to that UUID is independent of the actual liking system or the granting system.
Isn't it integral to the context? Because isn't there a relationship going on here between two nodes? In order for one node, in order for the node to like TiVo's post, it has to have a reason why it's liking TiVo's post. You can't just like it.
Yes, because otherwise it's like Twitter, and people can just try to game the system to gain followers. So it's like a beauty contest. And then those can be influenced.
And there could, you know, somebody could be expressing two types of thoughts. And when it comes to Moreau boards, TiVo's great. When it comes to tokenomics, he gets greedy. So, you know, we kind of got to qualify TiVo.
In terms of the data primitives, how can we accommodate that, Vincent? Because it's not just a simple matter of a UID. It's also there is a necessary context. Don't you see? In terms of, in order to give TiVo reputation, there has to, in order for us to not go down the Facebook route, we have to have a necessary edge, if you like. It's either going to be an edge, and I can't think if it's going to be an edge or a node. Presumably it's an edge because there's some sort of contractual element to it. Because if you're saying, I like TiVo's post because XYZ, then XYZ sounds like something contractual, maybe. I don't know, so thinking off the top of my head.
So you want to inject, basically you're talking about injecting some kind of other information into the data structure besides the reference to the original post and their key saying they like. You want to inject some extra information.
Yeah, to moderate, to ameliorate the I don't know what they call the effect, the Facebook effect, essentially.
I don't see why. Okay, I get what you're saying. So you just want some kind of you wanted some kind of an injection stream where they can inject more context into the like.
But
And
it's it's also, you can also analyze it. It's viewable. It's like in the same way you're measuring the number of likes, you're measuring the context. The context, both of them they have the capacity to be analyzed.
This is really good. Okay. So let's step back and let's say, okay, what does context? So we have a data structure it's a document. It's like a Word doc. You can put anything in there. But what is required to inject context? So it's pretty obvious what we need to. I guess it's not pretty obvious. We should probably look at that too. But let's assume there's a function that allows you to create the transaction that adds information. Okay, now we want to inject more information into that transaction. What does that look like? Let's look at that as this. Let's try to find a series of primitives that allows us to inject information into a transaction. In this case, that is the why you like. But in general, what we're trying to do here is the base transaction is just the document and then your key, right? But we want to inject more information. How do we do that? Fundamentally, like concretely, how do we want to, in this demo system, inject more information into that transaction?
I can't understand where you're coming from this injection. I mean, maybe I'm missing something, because for me, it's fundamental. If you're liking something for a reason, and if you're not being able to encapsulate that in a data sense, then you're not adequately representing it in a data sense. And that is the reason why that you have partial liking systems, like the liking system in Facebook, for example, because they haven't encapsulated likes. They've encapsulated a kind of drug system, if you like, in there, an incentive system to like things. It's not, the like is a misnomer. When you like a post on Facebook, you're not liking something, you're just feeding in an algorithm. If there was a necessary encapsulation in the like, where if you like something on Facebook, you had to account for why you did like it. If that was a necessary part of it, not something injected, but something functionally, in terms of functional programming, part of the function of liking something. So you could,
what if we had an oracle that requires you to say, describe why you like? Like let's not try to make it too complicated. Let's just say, okay, you have to not only provide your private key as an actor in order to sign the transaction, so that you can get this changed.
I think you need to point to a data collection, so then you can have all of these reasons there.
Yeah, it could be a drop down, but it's basically an oracle. We're talking about adding a user input field to this transaction. So it's not just the actor, there's also an oracle component. So there's going to be the person that actually signs the final transaction, but there's also going to be, you're going to require that an oracle or a user input also contribute to this transaction. So we can maybe just do a comma user input oracle. And that's only for grants like, right? So for removing like, you don't need to give a reason. Does that sound okay? Or do you need to also give a reason for removing your like?
I think a reason also for removing like.
Okay.
I'm noticing that Felix and Marta have their hands up.
Go ahead, Felix. I think you were first.
I have a question about the criteria of a like. So, for example, when I say, okay, I like something, this can mean everything and nothing. The same when you say, he's intelligent. What does it mean? He's motoric intelligent, he's social intelligent, he is intersocial intelligent. So by just saying like, for example, what Marta said before, also you allow a design for gamifying and to allow a whole crowd to only can you call it? And then it becomes only about reputation in a very weird sense. So how do you call this word again? Fuck off.
Call it political or power.
We can abstract, I think we can actually, I mean, again, we can abstract away from the term like to say just a function like. So we can drop like and just call it L or something. And it becomes an abstract in that semantic. It's just what are we doing? What are we doing? We are acting, we're creating reputation, okay? So to create reputation, we don't like something, we are doing L on it. Okay, so then it becomes abstract, it doesn't become preloaded with any cultural preconceptions. Yeah, so.
Back to the word was then it becomes just a popularity contest. And Tivo, do you remember? It's a while ago already when we were thinking about voting, but by different criteria. That I say, for example, or voting or liking, that I have a social like, or a design like, or a logistic like, or whatnot. So a human is more than just one statement. So when there is, for example, a developer who is really doing amazing good work, but he's not at all in publicity or whatnot, he's not even able to marketing his product, he will be never has as much reputation as somebody who is just simply good in speaking, which doesn't mean that the developer is lower. So when you have a criteria where you say, okay, I like this person for this special value, and not only one like on the whole person, more to split the person up into different criteria, and you can like different parts of this criteria. Let's say, for example, intelligence, interaction, communication, whatnot. So different blocks. And with this also, you don't allow really that something becomes just a popularity contest where just the person who speaks the best will almost the most popular.
Yeah, we kind of touched this topic at the beginning, but and the key for me, it represents that the same thing you're showing here, that the key is for the specific reputation. But now going back to this Oracle reference or user input, like if you are going to now, okay, we have this reference there, and then now we don't know how, like, what is good reference. Then we are gonna vote for a good reference. But now how do we vote for is the good reference like validated as a good reference? Like we can endlessly go, like, where is the end? So for me, for the simplicity, because we want the entire goal is to just get in a local area to make this reputation work. We in here, me saying I like all of you, why do I need to give like an essay for each of that? And if like, yeah, so because when we are going to try these restrictions that like that we don't show, like the popularity won't, for the outsiders, we are not popular, we are all popular, whatever. If my like is, if nobody likes me, but everybody likes everybody else, outside people still see me as popular as all of you because I'm in the group and I'm accepted here. So we are like not really but once he gets in, then he sees, okay, I'm not that really maybe popular. So I think it's different compared to like Facebook or something, where everything is measured the same way, where we are measuring based who we interact with and what circles we are in. I'm sorry, I was not using the hand.
Marta's up next.
So, I mean, maybe one way to address the giving context as a functional component would be maybe so we have the thing that where we choose somebody, which we previously called like, the other, that aspect, but then we could also have, we could start to construct a database on when we do something, when someone does something, when they're creating something, it goes into a database and then and becomes a line item in an item in a database. And then, so when we like somebody, that database is cross-referenced. And then, so that person carries with those things. So there's like, so the things in the database of the things they've done have weights. They have specific weights that would also influence. So, I mean, that's a way to be able to talk about what Tivo just talked about too, I think, in terms of like, and that creates that weight influences, it can be seen by anyone who clicks on that person. They can see what they've done. So there's actually a history of what they've done within the community, and that's spelled out. We don't have to type something and say what we like about them. So, you know, it doesn't have to be personal. It could actually be related to what they've done, if that makes sense.
In that same vein, I think, or to tie a couple things together, where my brain is going is the context matters. So I love what you were saying, Felix, as far as like, you know, as a designer, I like this person. As a developer, I don't like this person, or like I just didn't like them because that's not what their skills are, you know, or vice versa. Or to state it in another way, in very highly political terms, in like the context of America, you know, if somebody earned likes because of their commentaries on the Fox News website versus somebody that earned likes because of their commentary on an MSNBC News website, it means different things to different people. And it exists by itself. And so whether or not I have affiliation towards Fox or MSNBC, I'm going to look at those things in a different way. What's important is to know the context in which that like is given. And I think that I would not be able to tell that from any description that's given, because then I would have to know the mindset of the person writing that description, but if I know the context where it's in, and because I was running in 2016 a startup around fact checks, and we ran into this problem that people will like. And what we had to set up instead as reputation is verification. So instead of liking an article that expressed your point of view, you had to go verify that the data in that article was true. If you could verify that that data was true, you added a +1 to it. And then anybody could go and verify it. And then we could prove a reputation for the article by how many people could verify the source, how many people could verify that it's there. And that was more objective than a liking system.
And just to respond to that, and not to jump out of, but I mean, I think we found that, I mean, the verified things on Facebook that they've been doing and on Twitter, we actually found that the verification, the fact checking was actually, they went back to the New York Times, or they went back to some paper, and then there was a political connection between the New York Times and that fact. And then, so it was really not really a fact. So it wasn't, you know, it was a false fact. So, I mean, there's that kind of thing. Then that gets really complicated, right? In terms of how to, is that really validating, or is it validating because there's a agenda? So anyway.
I was thinking, I was trying to find a study, there's a study somewhere, I can't find it at the moment, where which looked at if you just based outcomes on reputational history. And I think there were studies done in the 70s on this, where it showed if you just do that, it leads to distortions and breakdown, because I think it's something related to what Steve was saying. Is you get a kind of assumption of authority, where someone is constantly voting, has gained a reputational history, and then they kind of rest on their laurels. And all the people, so you get a kind of, everyone delegates their responsibilities to that person, and everything goes downhill because they essentially all everything vests in that person, and people give up their own sense of responsibility. And I think there's a counter to that where, well, maybe there's a balance where between you have to model, if you like, instantaneous reputation. Is this person acting now in a way that is equitable or fits with our standards of reputation, which is a cultural issue, maybe. So is this person acting in a way that is trustworthy? Can we say that about a person without referring to their history? And should we do that? Because that person might be a new person to our community, and we may need to trust the people who come to our community in that way. Because if we constantly referring back to reputational history, then we become a kind of clique, potentially. And then if I can find the study, which there's a name for it, and go down that rabbit hole. Felix, I think is the...
Oh, Vincent has his hands raised.
Oh, Vincent, sorry. Vincent.
Yeah, so I was cleaning up a little bit. Okay, so I want to bring us back to, this is great discussions. I want to say that these are great discussions, but I really do want to investigate the primitives that can build something. And then we can extend it and we can see what other primitives are required. So I just want to go over what I have so far, and then I'm going to, I'm also going to add what Roberto said, because I really like what he said. I think it kind of follows with Thibaut was saying, and that's kind of this perception score. So people can just arbitrarily give somebody a number. Why not? So a dyad is just two people, right? So it's that I'm using a dyad as a primitive because there are interesting things that happen when you require multi-signature, and consensus around multi-signature can have any number of different consensus algorithms. So I'm just going to assume that this consensus algorithm for this dyad, the dyad being you as a person giving your private key saying, I am giving my like, I approve this like. And then the user input oracle, that's the context, that's the text that you're going to put. The consensus is the text exists with some kind of minimum character count, which is a parameter we can set. And then the actor is just you giving the private key. So the interface as defined by this is going to be a user input and a push button, like a way to give your private key. So I'm just trying to get the primitives out here, right? So the user input oracle will define the text interface that is required. The actor signer oracle or actor signer will require an interface that lets you give your private key. How this is actually implemented on blockchain is irrelevant. I just want to see this work and see it define and produce an interface, even if it's just a little CLI or something stupid like that, right? I just want to see it work. The two functions that I've gotten from this conversation are that you can grant this token or this like, which has this information. It has the document that you're liking, the context of you liking it, and then a signature. Obviously, that's you signing with your private key. And then your SSID, so that you can show that we can show that you're uniquely liking something. And then you can remove a like, right? So by some function where you again get the same interface, you can then remove a like. What those functions are exactly, we can play with and just get it to work. It just has to work. This is all going to be stored in a single data structure for each person. Each person will have a data structure tied to them, which has to be managed by the DAO, which is another interesting. This is a data primitive now, which I think is very interesting. So is this data primitive going to be a blockchain metadata? Is it going to be off-chain bucket somewhere? I'm curious, right? So what is this data? But it's a primitive that I'm calling data that must live somewhere, and it will likely be too big to be metadata on chain, right? Because this, if you have one person that's very prolific, or they have lots of people, 100,000 people liking something with context is a ton of data. That's novels worth of data. So this is a primitive that I'm just calling data, but it's something that we'll need to figure out how to compile, right? So like this data, I'm going to say this is a blob. And I'm just going to put like maybe 5 gigabytes, because this could get huge. You want to have that expandability, and then immediately says, okay, I cannot compile this into an on-chain implementation. It just won't work. It's too much data. Reputation, if we're going to do this, I think it's safe to say, and you can argue with me on this, this amount of information for reputation, just this part, not any other, not Roberto's, adding Roberto's perception stuff, cannot live on chain. There's too much information. So this data must be compiled elsewhere. So there has to be some kind of like IPFS component to this or something like that. Otherwise it just won't work. Really interesting, right? So that's an interesting primitive. So I'm going to say that there's a data primitive that's a blob that has a limit of 5 gigabytes per person or something like that. And then I'm going to add Roberto's, which is really interesting. He says people should just be able to give a 0 to 10 score for somebody, and then you can average it. I mean, then why not, right? So I'm going to add that because Roberto said it, and let me know if I should add other things. Reputation itself, I just want to put this out there as something that people should think about. Reputation itself is not the data. It's the interpretation of the data. Okay, so how you derive somebody's reputation from this data blob or from this set of numbers that people give is up to the reputation aggregator, right? So whether or not how you aggregate this data into a score, a social score, or a reputation score, or how you display it is another layer, right? So I'm going to collect right now for this system the document ID, context, and signature of anybody that likes, say, an article or a post or a conversation or a conference or a presentation or something like that, whatever the document ID prefers to. I'm also going to collect as a set of data people's perceptions of another, right? So it's just a bunch of 0 through 10 or 1 through 10 scores that you can give to somebody. These two data structures will live and be linked to an SSID. So every SSID in the reputation system will have both of these data structures. The actual reputation, what you get away from it, what is presented to somebody that's looking to understand whether they can trust you or how active you are or whatnot, that's another layer, right? That is a functional interpretation of the raw data that people have contributed to your reputation. And I think that is more complex and should be more complex and more involved and more intuitive than the underlying signature save. That's
not necessarily, because if someone is granting you reputation, it's a reputation, or you're earning reputation, there's a kind of front loading going on. Where if I'm granting you some reputation for something you've done, it's not after there's something I have given you straight away up front, isn't there? Which is called reputation. There's some kind of assumption that I'm making that something is being valued. So it's not just a datum. It's a datum that is loaded, in a sense. Yes, you can come back to it afterwards and say, well, Stephen gave this reputation to Vincent, but I still did that. So I mean,
And I have a question about the structure size, because I have a little bit the impression that it's quite difficult to capture a reputation system when we see it from the perspective to include as much people as possible, which is for me quite powerful. Because, for example, how is it possible that someone likes or dislikes, for example, in our regard charts? Nobody of us knows him. How is it possible that I can like or dislike this person, which I don't even know? What is when you create, for example, a reputation system, which limits is, for example, maximum 12 people, and this 12 people which can delegate the likes on you or not, this is based on already the relation you have to them. So you never can develop too much power roles because nobody would be able to reach, for example, 1,000 or 1 million likes because it's simply not possible by design, and it's perfect. And maybe from the design structure, how would it be to say, oh, okay, create a reputation system for maximum 12 people, but on fractal, so that there's not one central ratings reputation system, that there are as many representative, because Vincent, you spoke about the blob. Let's say, okay, this blob you were speaking about tries to include as many people as possible. What happens now if you divide this big blob in hundreds of small blobs, which avoids already to create two big power roles, because there will never be a possibility that 100 people or 1,000 or 1 million people like on the person, said by the fact that it's never possible that anybody can have a relation to 1,000 people, and reputation is based on relation. No? Without relation, there is no reputation. If I want to like an article, then only because I can relate my personal interest to this article. But we are speaking about humans yet. Humans are not articles, humans write articles. So from a data structure, would it be even easier maybe to say, okay, fix it on a very small amount of people, relation-based?
I think that's fine. Just how do you do it?
You can do it.
I think that's fine. Okay, so you can have we can define that you require a coalition to submit data to the structure. That's fine. How do you define the coalition?
You have to, both sides have to agree with each other. They know each other, and let's say, like Felix said, let's have a 100 maximum. So if I know 100 people, and now 101 person wants to now like me, then I have to drop somebody from my network, or automatically the less like somebody is just removed from my network.
Okay, I want to let Pete go really quick. What if we enhance, I want to stay concrete because this is important. Implementation is important. Like I need to know what primitives to use. So what if we move from a dyad that is the actor and the user input to a coalition that is the actor, the user input, and the individual who you're referring. And they have to signify that they know you. Or there's another oracle system that you must register as an acquaintance prior to being able to submit a like or a score. I think that's fine. But what do you think? But we got to be concrete here. So what you're saying is that there needs to be a separate system, a separate oracle that manages acquaintances. And then if acquaintance, so the structure will then look out and ask that oracle, is this signer, is this actor an acquaintance of the person that they're trying to sign this transaction and send to? If so, then I will open up the user input oracle, then the interface will appear and this transaction becomes valid, right? I think that's fine. So the consensus, we just grow the consensus to be a coalition consensus with two oracles. Now, one of the oracles is an acquaintance oracle, the other one's the user input oracle so that you can put context into the like, and then finally the signature that says, I'm going to send this transaction. What do you think of that? Just trying to keep it solid.
Should TiVo have a good response to this? You don't have stuff like this.
I think this goes towards the direction that you're talking about, but correct me if I get too far off base. I'm seeing this kind of network kind of thing. So I'm thinking about this in length of time perspective as well. So like, let's say within this context of the Swarm 2021, I want to give reputation to TiVo. 20 years from now, well, let me start with this and say, all right, so I give him an award for the reputation and it goes onto the blockchain. 20 years from now, Swarm 2021 doesn't exist anymore and it disappears. That thing that I used to give him this reputation. If there's a reference to it on the blockchain that says at some point in time, there was, and maybe it's an NFT, maybe it's this idea that I gave TiVo a non-fungible token in 2021 through this system, and that is written into the blockchain. And so 20 years from now, it doesn't matter if Swarm 2021 exists or not. Maybe there's a new thing called Hive 2041, and then at that point, I give, reputation to Steve, and through that system. But there's a registry forever on the blockchain that at 20 years ago, I gave one to TiVo. 20 years after that, I gave one to Steve, and those systems don't have to exist anymore, but they had to have existed at the time.
That makes sense.
Pete, just to get concrete, so in that acquaintance matcher, recall, I'm just going to go off of TiVo, so that you got to have an acquaintance, but now we're going to add this layer of contextual acquaintance. So it was this, should we add another user? So should the acquaintance engine also be a coalition where it's both actors and a user input oracle? Only now it's a collaborative one where you both have to agree that you've met in this context. So I can't just say, I met you in Swarm 2021. I can request that you agree that I met you in Swarm 2021. And you can, you know what I'm saying? So before we sign, we have to agree that the context around our acquaintance is correct. Then that will get published as an acquaintance.
I wouldn't even call it acquaintance, I would call it engagement, because it's not the fact that I'm acquainted with Pete, it's the fact that I engaged with him. I had a meaningful engagement with him, in terms of, in contribution terms, in terms of reputation. Otherwise, the reputation can just be based on acquaintance, potentially. So a reputation cannot just be based on acquaintance, because that's a kind of popularity contest. And again, we're back to that again.
Yeah.
So we're back to what I hear from Pete saying is that in how you put it in terms of context. I see that context in terms of something that lives in history as well, actually, because it lives in history because it's a record of engagement. And what is an engagement? Engagement is some sort of meaningful activity where a contribution was made. Again, we're back to this issue of contribution, which is a kind of oracle record of Pete's contribution was his engagement with each other.
To respond, if I can respond to that real quickly, like I love this idea of the consent built into giving that reputation, or giving that, I forget the phrase it says, but I like what you said, Stephen. Because if TiVo and I consent to be part of a network wherein he can give me this, I'll just call it NFT, this reputation, this token, then that's part of that, but like what would not have consent is if I try to give TiVo a negative kind of thing, like, and say I invent this, this sort of fake award system that pokes fun at people, and I want to give that to TiVo because it's a negative thing, but he never gets a chance to consent to that, then that would be, I think, a big problem. So I like this idea that you have to have consent from both sides to accept that token.
Marta, you want
to jump in there, Marta? I think Marta's actually up first.
Yeah.
Thanks. So because I have experience with these kinds of systems in terms of being a victim of them, I think that one of the things is that the what prevents a group of people who want to gain reputation coming into the DAO as a group, but not knowing that they're coming in as a group, and then all giving reputation points to, or likes to, somebody in their group or a group of people in their group, and then that group gains power and the other group that maybe was actually doing something then is removed in terms of their influence or their trustability. So I mean, because that can happen. That has happened to me in either in social media. I was a victim of it, what you guys call now a Sybil attack. But I mean, that can happen. So, and that's why I think it's, and then that does not just disrupt your reputation within this context, it disrupts it everywhere. So I think that you have to be able to, there has to be some, that's why I think it's really dangerous to say you can give them a 1 to 10 vote, woo, right then, there we go, and then we could, but now it all sounds fine when you're talking amongst a group of friends. But when you open that up and you scale it, it becomes a very easy, dangerous opportunity. So I like what Pete said about being able to sort of timestamp it in a way and give it a certain time length. But also, I mean, I don't think you have to carry the data with you. It doesn't have to be like, 5 gigs of data with one person. I mean, it can just be a pointer to data, something that represents that data in a database that's the context. And, and then what that data is would need to be determined, but I mean, or, what you want to include in that database. But I mean, it could just be that this one person has, there's a way to represent, well, they have, 41 points in this database, and you can go here to review this if you want. It doesn't have to be carried with them within the system. It can just be a pointer. So that's all.
Yeah, kind of lost track of what I wanted to say, but the one thing was that like I see this group, if we are if you are setting like a max people, like 100 people you can keep as a coalition or somebody, then over timeline, this person is moving as a group, like because you only have 100 people you are like, so you're sort of 100% popular when you have 100 people you interact with. And then the popularity means that all the nodes or the people you interact with also have to have 100 people around you. And now the question is like what defines the popularity? Is that massive amount of like how it explodes, how center you are, where does it like end, or like in how many iterations you get into the age where the people only have 10 people engaged and interacted. So, and I think that takes us back to the type of like we have, like is it social, is it development, like very specific like stuff. And also I don't know is how relevant is what Pete said, that have a non-fungible token in a history. What it does, it will show the history of like who these people interacted over time, but it won't show who is this person right now. But one concept what we came up with Gimba Labs, or at least it was mentioned there, and I like it, was burning this reputation or tokens. And so always give a time frame. So yeah, I like Felix and Stephen and all of you right now, but if 1 month passes, automatically this like is removed. But if in 1 month we still engage with each other, you will get, every day I will give you a like until I don't. That's the whole point. And I think this combination of being constantly like engaging. So it's not like just a like, it's about engagement. Like the engagement token equals like, and yeah, and the max limit of like what Felix said, like 100 people.
I said maximum 12.
Ah, okay. In my mind, 12 is too little because like I have a family, it's already more than few people. Then I have co-workers, which is about 10 people I interact daily. And now I'm in this place where I have about 20 people weekly. So, and I have friends too. I forget the friends all the time.
It's just to split it really to something like 12. It's really just a thing to say, oh, okay, so that when a big group joins into a system, for example, and can simply gamify everything, it's never possible because it's really small groups. And maybe it's possible that you are in several groups, but this always depends the context. Another question I would have is, for what is reputation used? At least, let's say you have reputation. What are you going to do with this reputation? Does it enable something?
Mm-hmm.
Because when we don't have a use case for a reputation, it doesn't even make sense to think about reputation, no? On the technological side.
I think the use cases are just analytics for now, like we mentioned before. Proxy for effort determines trustworthiness for outside party and transparency and observability, which is again analytics. And if Vincent can make this graph, that it would be quite cool to see if I put in my public key and see all my relations. And maybe if I can change the date and time, then I see how the graph evolves.
Because Vincent, do you know Aaron?
I read through it, yeah.
Aharon, he's a guy living in Israel working on the voting app. Because
Well,
I had to
just say Aragon, the blockchain.
Nee, Aaron. Aharon.
Oh no, I don't.
Because no, I'm not since a short while. And yesterday I had a call with him because he was joining the ecosystem and he wants to develop, or he developed a voting app, but it's in Hebrew. Now he translates everything into English. And yesterday the idea was, okay, hey, how can we use the very first wrap of a voting app, which is maybe even on-chain later, but where you say, for example, that you can delegate your votes. So when you say voting or reputation, it's a little bit the same. And I can say, for example, I can use my reputation to delegate my reputation to somebody. And with this reputation, you can vote actually, for example, on proposals or whatnot.
You know, I think that's really valid, right? I don't think that, well, I'm of the opinion that reputation isn't unidimensional and that compressing it to a number is dangerous for a lot of, not dangerous, just loses a lot of information, right? I'm also a data nut. So I'm of the opinion that you should store as much as you can safely. And then you should build implementations of the view of that data as the reputation that you need. Everybody has a different need for reputation. I think that should reflect how they aggregate the reputation information available for a person. But that's how I would say it. As far as voting and stuff like that, yeah, absolutely. Like I think that we could definitely add a piece that has some kind of a stake delegation point, but I mean, like mimic the stake pools, and then we could diagram how that might work, and figure out the primitives for delegation.
So maybe reputation should be seen more as rather something static, more like water, you know, because it's more something more fluid. Because it's something, yes, you may create a history of reputation. It can't be a static history because you're constantly spending it, constantly earning it. It's something dynamic. For it to be, as Felix says, for it to be meaningful, it must be fluid.
When I think about reputation, it's mostly in the sense that we had the last sessions when we were speaking about, especially the problem sensing for toolmaker and maintainer. The biggest part of the conversation was about reputation, but reputation in relation to a rewarding system. For example, in this ecosystem, you have a bunch of people which are highly engaged with add a lot of value by the action already, but there is no way to reward them instead or beside to a proposal. Well, okay, you write your proposal, but if you are a really good developer or a really good person and you are really able to add a lot of value to the whole ecosystem itself, or even out of the ecosystem, it doesn't mean that you are funded, because the voters, it's not the community who votes, no? The most of the people who vote, they don't have any clue about the people. So building up a reputation system would allow at least also to reward people's engagement, effort, and investment, like a social security backup. Okay, you didn't get funded, but hey, look, here we have a reputation system which shows, hey, you are really engaged, you add a lot of value, people can verify it, and here you have something based on your reputation, which shows you, hey, your engagement is appreciated, you have something for it. So for example, some rewards from a social fund.
I think that what we've diagrammed here will accomplish that in some senses, right? Because you're going to have people that have contextually approved some document that you produced or some article of work. That's nice. And you also have these groups of people that have rated you. I'm not saying this is perfect, but I think that you can get that from this to some extent. And what Stephen said about time limits, transactions are timestamped. So I mean, I think the data structure probably, it doesn't say it here specifically, but we can add that in. So that implicitly that all transactions that are stored, all database entries, for example, are timestamped. And so by implementation of the view, by implementation of how you aggregate the data, you can choose to weight things over time however you see fit. And I think that's just interesting. And I don't want to say that there's a right and wrong, and we can get into, I think burners too, I think someone had mentioned burners, like transaction burners. That's an interesting primitive too, right? To have a burn system that could actually go in and destroy things after a certain amount of time. Mm-hmm. We can add that later. But what I want to talk about now is just getting back to, I actually want to build these primitives and implement it and show the graph, hopefully by tomorrow with Town Hall, which means I need to,
Vincent wants to build. Let me build.
let me just talk about what we've got so far, because I think it's quite brilliant, and I really like it, and I think this can be ugly coded and ugly graphed.
There is no Town Hall tomorrow.
Oh, there's not.
No, it's
a sworm session.
Swarm session. That's what I meant. I'm sorry. I'm just all my head.
They all blend into one anyway.
My brain is everywhere. So right now we've got these coalitions, which I think are super interesting. So like I love the idea that almost immediately within these systems, you end up getting away from an individual actor being able to do anything. And you end up with these required kind of like multi-signature coalitions that are responsible for actually signing the transactions. And then I think that in and of itself to me is very valuable in terms of primitives of the DAO. I think that as a primitive of the DAO, the idea of multiple people or multiple entities, not just people, but a mixture of oracles and people and user inputs are gonna be required. That is gonna be, if in this system that we just put together, we basically cannot agree on anything where one person has control over another person's reputation. They have to have some kind of an oracle input. Then coalitions, I think, are a very valid primitive. The idea that we need to have some kind of an additive framework for this future DAO Lego bricks, to say that you can say that an actor A plus actor B plus actor C, or in this case, an actor and two oracles creates a coalition, and that the function requires a signature of a coalition, which requires some kind of a consensus algorithm. And that as we construct the DAO, we can vote on all of them, right? We can vote on the minimum character count for the user input oracle. We can vote on the engagement exists Boolean function for that, but we can vote. This can be explicitly defined, and then we still get to interact with the system as signers. So we get these oracles, we get these signs. I think this is really cool. So what I've got so far is that in this demo reputation system, we're going to have 3 oracles, an engagement or 2 oracles, an engagement oracle, a user input oracle, and just 2 oracles, a user input oracle and an engagement oracle. They just get used twice. For functions, there's a grants like, a removes like, which are basically just add transaction, remove transaction. And a store engagement, which is also just an add transaction. It's just that the transactions look a little bit different because they're storing different data. There are 3 data stores, a data store that stores the document likes, and a data store that stores the kind of more fluid perception, like 0 to 10, do I like you today? But again, we have that engagement oracle. So not just anybody can rate their perception of you. You have to agree that they can. Otherwise, they cannot rate you in that way. So that hopefully protects against some really interesting idea, right? So you have to agree that you basically have to friend somebody in a specific context for them to be able to perceive you. And we can always grow that, right? Like maybe only certain types of people in certain types of contexts are even allowed this perception score, the 0 to 10 perception score. Maybe that even has a separate explicit context, like work perception, professional perception. Really interesting, not going to go there right now, but for now it's there in the demo system. This can be implemented as such. So 3 functions that all look very, very similar. 2 oracles, 3 data sources, and the same consensus function or 2 consensus functions. One of the consensus functions is for the actor and the user input in the engagement oracle. It's just a what do you call it when you add things together?
Concatenate.
Yeah.
Aggregate.
No, not multiply.
Yeah. Composed. It's composed. It's composed of three checks. The private key is given, the minimum character count is met, and the engagement exists in the engagement database. So that's this set of consensus functions that is then composed into the consensus, the master consensus output for whether or not this coalition can sign these transactions. Differently, and I didn't write it here, for the engagement one, that is 2 private keys and somewhat curious is how do you agree on we both met at this thing, right? So there's the user input where I can say like we met at Swarm 2021, but then both people need to agree that is what it is. So there's some kind of we might need some kind of a queue or cache with which to store that, and then we can both check it. I'm not quite sure how concretely that this user input oracle is different than the other user input oracles, because this user input oracle requires read access.
So at least something what can prove that at this time, at this moment, 2 people have met, for example.
Well, that's a non-fungible token, but that means every time we want to give reputation, we pay 2 ADA plus transaction fees.
That doesn't have to be on chain, right? So let's not worry about the compilation. That would be how you compile it, right? So ideally, you build the DAO. It's a set of contracts, right? Then you can figure out through smart compilation what is the most efficient way of combining these things, right? So I think that's a compilation problem and optimization problem that I want to get into, but I don't think we're ready for it. That makes sense. Like,
I mean, it could be just a sidechain record of engagement or acquaintance. So it doesn't have to be on chain. It doesn't have to be an NFT. I mean, the only thing that has to be on chain is the transactional nature of all this. That's all that has to be on the blockchain, is any transactional nature. And in the metadata, maybe on the chain, a reference back to the more expansive data. But that doesn't answer your question, Vincent. You need an answer to the.
So this user input oracle over here for the engagement is an interesting problem in terms of governance, because now what we have a different type of data store that is like a memcache or something, right? So we need you and I both must agree on a piece of data prior to it going in. So on the likes thing, we add our context, but we can submit the whole transaction at once, right? So we add our private key and we add our context, and then we ship it off, the oracles do their checks, and the transaction goes in. Okay.
Is there some analogy here between key pairs in, you know, when you want to unlock something using key pairs? I think a cryptographic solution to this. So where you have one, for example, I want to prove that me and Felix worked on something, and we each have a key. Yeah, is that a solution? Or
I think it could be. So let's just play through that, right? So we temporarily put, say in the engagement data blob, we put a temporary, say there's an SQL database that's
a hash, a cryptographic hash or something.
A cache or something, right? The only problem is, like, say I type in swarm 2021 and then you type in swarm space 2021, and then we do the comparison. We're never going to match, right? So we need to see that data, but I think that's okay. Maybe that is the trick. Maybe
that could be abstracted again, because I think there's a solution to this with come across the same thing where people are trying to claim tokens from a pool, for example, and there's some abstraction which they refer to, like go to this pool.
Okay.
And then each person has their own key, and then they both unlock, you know. Maybe that's not the way to go. I'm not sure if it's the right go, but
And what would be, because I think I head off as well soon. Vincent, what would be the next step?
Well, the next step is to build it.
Easy, cool, okay.
Well, no, this is great. So the next step is actually to build these oracles as these actor. I'm not going to change the actual implementation of the action yet. I'm going to keep them functional for now, and we'll just see how it goes. But to actually build the assembly of a coalition, the composition of these consensus algorithms as functional compositions, try to keep the signatures in line, and just see if I can get the primitives to graph, and to get the system to work as a system of these standard actions. And if I can, and if the graph builds, then I'll present that, and then people can play with it. And then we can just go back and say, these primitives work or these primitives don't. But from my perspective, this has been a massive success, because what I've seen is oracles are without question a primitive of a DAO. I don't think we're gonna get away from that. External oracles are a primitive of a DAO that have to be considered. Internal data, which is like locked data that the DAO controls and accesses, but externally cannot. However that lock happens is another thing. Like there's going to be a lot of data pools within a DAO, and that has to be considered. How that data is accessed, authenticated by the DAO is super interesting. These boxes, if you ever, I think some of this is done like cloud architecture, are in some ways kind of restricted networks, in the sense that they have like protected data within them, and how that compilation is vital to the formal proof that the DAO is secure. Because if anybody can get into these data blobs and start messing with stuff, then the thing doesn't work.
And so you can do another session. So you're going to build it, and then we're going to do another session. Say
that's what I hope. I want to build this and then present the build process and the graph that comes out of it. Maybe do a quick simulation, see if the interface pops out, and see what the interface looks like, and just do a proof of concept. The next level POC.
So, and what would help you in the process to have an easy, fast, and safe executive way in this product?
I don't know if somebody, ooh, this is something that I do need help on. If somebody could sketch out or pseudocode these signed transactions, I'm not familiar. I've done some submission to blockchain stuff, but I'm still not familiar with actually implementing a signed transaction and what that looks like. Is it a JOT with just a hashed signature? You know what I'm saying? Like, it would be great if.
Okay. Can you write down a little bit, let's say like a wish list for.
Okay, yeah, wish list.
So this, you know, put it in that note, so I just put the principles.
Okay, so.
Implement the signed transactions.
Because what I'm directly thinking about is in the 11th of August, we're gonna start the project engine line. So this project engine line means that we're gonna start to pitch some nice ideas in the town hall, in the after town hall, and 2 days later, there's a hackathon starting, a Cardano hackathon by Boone Bergsma. So that would be in 3 weeks. So there would be 3 weeks of preparation, for example, because it's already always difficult to onboard, for example, developer into a project. Everybody wants developer. Hey, everybody has great ideas, but yeah, they have to be built. So, and therefore you need developers. So when you design, for example, already everything, and you know quite well already what needs to be done. And for example, say already for the next 3 weeks to have recurring sessions already, ideate it, define it, bring people on board maybe which would like to participate in this, or do you want to make it totally alone? I don't know. Would be up to you.
I would love help. I'm always hesitant to ask for too much help until I know what to ask for, but I think I can safely ask for this because I don't. It's something that I know it's in this diagram, right? So one of them is implementing a signed transaction. What does that really mean from an abstract standpoint? Like what does that mean? And then how do you make sure that you keep the data, the metadata in it? Is it? I really don't have a lot of experience with that outside of like JWTs and web stuff, where you're basically just you're just doing some kind of like a salted encryption of the. Or,
you need to do that in
hash.
Python. You need to do that in Python.
You could do it in Python. Honestly, anything. I'm pretty comfortable in multiple languages, and I can certainly re-implement it in Python if I just see what it should do. You know what I'm saying? I'm just not sure. Like, okay, if I'm given a private key, what do you do with it? Is it a salt for a SHA hash? Is it a Blake 2B? You know what I'm saying? Like, I just don't know what to do with it. And then like, how do you take that signed transaction, put the data with it, and then how do I want to store that such that in the future people can prove that, you know, all that stuff. Like, how do you prove that? From what I understand, it's like a big like dictionary object or hash table with like a header, and the header has some information. I'm just not sure how to store the data in these data stores. So
if we post that about the price, we might be able to get some help from people.
Yeah, but that would be super, right? Because that would help me design the outputs of these functions, as well as the inputs that I need from the coalition, right? Another thing
I'm going to have to go to time. But thank you for a great session, Vincent. It's been it was a great evening. So very, very productive.
Too simply. Okay, multi-sig, which is I think really complicated. So like how to do the multi-sig. So these coalitions, everybody needs to sign the transaction. That's interesting. And then keeping the data secure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For me, it's really quite funny. The last 2 weeks, it was really, for example, in the ideation of the tool makers and maintainers problem sensing. It was quite clear that one of the biggest problems which will be addressed to, you know, this catalyst circle is reputation system. So, okay, it's Martha?
Oh, trustworthiness.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so to just hop in the session and see, okay, this guy wants to build a reputation. This is quite cool. Okay, just a fucking cool community. It's amazing. But
well, I didn't decide this. Everybody else voted on it, and then so we just decided to do it as an implementation for a proof of implementation, a proof of concept. I think it'll work.
Where did it come from?
It was a vote. People liked it the most. TiVo put up the discussion notes in the like the green box. And
But I
people
mean,
just-
it came from, because there's all these different discussions, like what Felix was just talking about. And there was one just in the circle discussion with Robert O'Brien and Nori. We were just talking all about that. That was just last night. And there was just huge discussion. Stephen was part of that. So then, this is the first time I've heard, and I thought you were just going to discuss, you know, sort of ideas about it. I didn't know you were actually building something. So I was kind of surprised. And we've had discussions on Gimbal Labs as well, right? Gimbal Labs is and they've been discussing storage, by the way. I don't know if you are aware of that. So
I am, and I think that there's some. I think that's going to be an interesting set of conversations to have. Yeah, it's an interesting problem. It's a super interesting problem. Because people don't want to get hacked, right? You don't want these DAOs to be hacked. How do we prevent that? I think it's going to be interesting. Okay, well, I'm going to take this and brew on it, and then I'm going to start implementing later today. Hopefully I'll have something this weekend, and I'll put out this wish list into Discord. Thanks, everybody. I know we for like 3 hours of your time.
thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day, guys.
Yo, likewise.
Hey, Felix.
Hey, Marta.
You have to leave. Are you in a hurry?
No, I'm really fine.
Well, it's kind of surprising me, so I'm kind of like in shock a little bit. So sorry about that. But so how did that come about? How did he come up? So there was a vote about him building something?
No, I don't really got what you said. The TiVo
Okay.
made the vote. There's so much going on. So
Okay.
much going on. I have no
All
clue.
right. So anyway, whatever. It'll be interesting. That'll be a really interesting discussion tomorrow. I'll be real curious to see how that works out. But we'll see. But anyway, it's good to do things, you know, because I mean, if you don't ever do anything and you just talk, then nothing gets done. So yeah, so that's good. All right, that's all. I just wanted to know if you knew something about how that came about, but that's cool.
No. And I really think now the community moves more and more really. What's really great to have all these communication platforms and all, but now the spirit changed a little. Now it's really switching in the mood. Okay, now we have met each other. A lot of people know already they have been in Gimbal Labs or after Town Hall or Swarm Session or whatnot. And now it really starts to build. This is amazing.
Yeah, no, and that's good. And there'll probably be other groups like Gimbal Labs too, don't you think, that will pop up and do things? Or do you think it'll all swell out of Gimbal Labs?
The what?
The building.
But in which regard to Gimbal Labs? I didn't got your question totally.
Oh, sorry. Well, you know how now if you come into the Swarm or into Catalyst, if you come into Catalyst, you sort of are directed to the Swarm, and if you come into the Swarm, you're kind of directed to Gimbal Labs.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah. So and Gimbal Labs is sort of the builder's circle in a sense, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's what I said to James as well, because in the beginning I was quite engaged as well in the playground and everything. And I said to him as well that I think I can help more, or Swarm can help more from the outside. Now in the beginning when Gimbal Labs, they had their breakout rooms always and their Gimbal Lab circles in the Swarm session. And we figured out that it's not the best way. So Swarm can operate much more outside and delegate people already to Gimbal Labs. So not too much, but the right people.
Right. And then today, I think it was yesterday, James was saying he put out a post that Playground might not be in Discord anymore. It might be in Zoom, and there might be a passive audience. Do you see that?
Didn't saw it, but this problem was already some weeks ago when some screen share stuff bugged and lagged. It was quite difficult. There was already a certain discussion about moving to Zoom already, and also to allow a little bit the same format to
Oh,
to
okay.
all these events.
Okay. Just curious. I like the Discord part because it's like really casual and people can
Yeah.
talk and, you know.
That's true. It has another style like Zoom where you sign in and then you are on your own platform. In Discord, it's more cozy, I think.
It is, yeah. So, and then it leads to different kinds of conversations. Then I think in the Zoom, it's kind of like with, it's more difficult because of that. But anyway, okay. Well, anyway, that's all.
But how about you? How are you?
I'm okay. Yeah, I'm good. I'm just working on things and trying to also figure out how to. I mean, I've gotten a little bit distracted by this piece of it in terms of trustworthiness because I think it's really, really important. So I guess I want to be a part of that discussion because I feel it's so important because I don't want something to be built that's where people are gonna get hurt. I really don't like people to get hurt. So
Totally agree.
yeah, so I want to just make sure that at least if anything else, at least I didn't like turn away and while something got built that, you know, and I didn't at least say something. So at least if I know if I said something, even if it doesn't get implemented, at least I tried. So in that way, that's kind of how I think about things. But you know,
To make sure that this aspect is included into this building process.
yeah, at least that, yeah, exactly. At least, I mean, even at least the voice is there, if nothing else. And you know, so that's all. But it's also an interesting problem, and I learned things from it too. I mean, I thought that was really interesting. I mean, the fact that Robert O'Brien is part Maori and he comes from that perspective, I found him to be really interesting, the things he's added and said. But then he added in that, did you read through that circle session discussion that ended?
Yes, a little, but it's true.
Okay.
Robert, he's really amazing. Right? He has a beautiful
Yeah.
point of view about things. I think.
Yeah, and then he suggested that we use that one's implementation. I forget what it's called now, but I looked and I read and listened to the podcast on it that he suggested we do, but it's only for small groups, and that's more about how to reward people. So I mean, that's the reward piece of this, and I guess what Vincent is building out more is just the DID, right? Reputation piece of it.
And I think also there's another beautiful happening, especially also with Robert. You have you know, last Wednesday in the afternoon in the town hall,
Mm-hmm.
when Vladimir presented his challenge, the challenge setting, his challenge setting. At least then Josh. I don't know if you know Josh. Josh, he's no Josh.
Wada.
Exactly. It was Josh. It was not Vladimir, but Vladimir also is a master of challenge setting. So just said, yeah, okay, hey, can we let's make I don't know if it was Josh, but anyway, to say, yeah, they're gonna speak about challenge settings and everything. And then directly Robert said as well, yeah, okay, I'm gonna join this because Robert as well, he's really in challenge and everything, and Sosha as well. So I think they go to team up. I think it will not only stay in challenge setting. So I think this would be because all of them, they love small groups. None of them like, yeah, big groups and big hype and yeah, let's change the world. No. We really cry. And I think maybe tomorrow they will have a breakout room. And I think you really should join that because I think this would be really a very small, very focused, very calm group. I think you would really fit well into.
Okay, so what is that one going to be? That's just going to be Sasha and Robert, and they're going to be the hosts. And Josh.
Exactly, tomorrow in the Swarm session.
Okay, all right, I'll do that. That sounds good.
I think there will be more people in this room.
Okay.
But I think it's the beginning really of some really nice people which are really matching very well together, starting to team up a little bit. Had a call with Sosha also about this yesterday.
Okay. Yeah, I always appreciate Sasha's input. It's always really
Mm.
well measured and considered. I like it. So that's good. That's really
You by
good.
your character, I think this could be really a nice proof for you as well, I think.
Okay. That sounds really good. I like that.
not the Cardano maximalist. We're gonna change the world and yeah, hype and everything and everything is so amazing. Hey, nay. Hey.
No, I think I mean, it doesn't match my personality type so much. So it's good. All right. Thanks, Felix, very much for talking and for everything. And also, I don't know, I think that I appreciate, you already know I appreciate you. I don't have to say that. Okay. So,
Like
Okay.
Martha.
okay, talk to you later.
See you soon. Take care for you, please.